day. Mr. Luckman and I welcome you to another discussion of the great ideas. We continue today with the discussion of man, his nature and origin. Last time, I did not complete presenting the evidence for Darwin's view of man's nature and origin. I want to complete that today before going on with presenting evidence on the opposite side. You will recall that I made the point very emphatically that Darwin did not rest his argument. Darwin never rested his argument on anatomical or physiological resemblances between man and ape, nor even on the evidence from embryology, nor on fossils. He knew that even if it was completely established that man differed from ape or other animals in degree, in all bodily respects, as for example in amount of brain weight, that would not make his point. Darwin saw that the crux of the argument was right on the point of man's differences or sameness with respect to mental power. His whole argument turned on the comparison of the mental powers of men and other animals. Let me read you the passage that opens chapters 3 of The Descent of Man, where Darwin makes the point at the very opening. He says, "My object is to show that there is no fundamental difference between man and the higher animals in their mental faculties." And he knew that if he could not establish the mental continuity between man and other animals, he could not establish his hypothesis about man's origin. Hence, in these two crucial chapters in The Descent of Man, chapters 3 and 4, he offers evidence to support his conclusion that, I now quote, "the difference in mind between man and the higher animals, great as it is, certainly is one of degree and not of kind." What is the evidence he offers? It all comes from a comparison of human and animal behavior. And that ultimately is the only relevant evidence on the question of the sameness or the difference of human and animal nature. Darwin's evidence, for example, as he goes through these two chapters, giving piece of evidence after piece of evidence, is something like this: that animals reason too, as well as men, only animals to a less degree. That animals use tools as men do, only perhaps in a more rudimentary way. That animals have speech and communication, though it is much more primitive than human speech. Now, since Darwin's day, all the evidence collected by experimental animal psychology, by the study of animals in laboratories, tends to confirm Darwin's conclusion. For example, all the laboratory work on animal learning, on trial and error learning by animals, tends to show how clever they are in solving the problems the psychologists give them. And then a great deal of work has been done on the question of animal communication. I shall mention later the work of Yerke, who studied the speech of chimpanzees and tends to show how elaborate the speech of chimpanzees is. But most striking of all are the studies made by the great German psychologist Wolfgang Köhler during the First War and the island of Tenerife. The studies of the mentality of chimpanzees. Let me tell you some stories of about what he found. He had a chimpanzee, for example, in a cage. And at the top of the cage, some bananas were hanging. And around the cage scattered were boxes. Well, this chimpanzee put the boxes one on the other, scampered up the boxes, reached for the banana before the boxes fell, and pulled the bananas out. Let me show you the picture of that chimpanzee doing precisely that, reaching for the bananas at the top of the cage by climbing up some boxes he had piled up himself. And then let me show you a picture of another chimpanzee using what is very much like a rudimentary tool, putting two bamboo sticks together. In fact, let me show you what this chimpanzee did. He was in the cage, and outside the cage in front of him, but out of reach of his arms, were some bananas. And there was two bamboo sticks lying around. And he first tried to reach with one bamboo stick and couldn't reach the banana. And then he tried to reach with another bamboo stick and couldn't reach the banana. And he sat back and held the two bamboo sticks in his hand and looked at them. And and nothing happened. And finally, as he was looking at them, they came into parallel lines with one another, and as soon as he saw them in parallel lines, he tried to fit one bamboo stick into the other. He succeeded, reached for the bananas, and raked them in. Intelligent chimpanzee. Now, if this evidence, all evidence of this sort that I've just been reporting, were indisputable, then I think the problem of man's nature and origin would be solved, so far as all scientific reasoning is concerned. But as I told you last time, I do not think it is indisputable. In fact, I am going to dispute it right now. I'm going to try to show you that in mind, if not in body, men differ essentially in kind from the apes and all other animals. I'm going to present evidence to you on this point, and the evidence is going to be presented under three main heads. Let me call your attention to these three main headings in this chart. These are the things that only men do. One, only men make artistic. Two, only men think discursive. Three, only men associate politically. Now, I'm going to proceed exactly as Darwin did, which I think is the right way to proceed, by comparing human and animal behavior. But I'm going to come out with the opposite result, proceeding exactly the same way. Because as I compare human and animal behavior, I find that there are certain things under these three headings that men do and men alone do. Things that no animal does at all in any degree whatsoever. And these special things that men do indicate a special mental power which men have. That is the power of reason. And if this is established, it establishes the definition of man as a rational animal, which means that man and man alone is rational, not that man has more reason or more reasoning power or more rationality or more intelligence than some other animal. It means that man and man alone is rational. Now, how will the evidence of human behavior show the presence of something you can't observe, namely reason, a power of reason? How will we interpret the evidence? What right have we to interpret the evidence as showing the existence in man of this special power? I say to you that there are two marks in the evidence itself which tend to show the presence of reason. One, if the human behavior is highly variable. And two, if it seems to show some understanding, some understanding that no animal has, an understanding that is found or expresses itself in a grasp of the universality of things, of the universal aspect of things. Now, last week I outlined the general shape this evidence would take to Mr. Luckman. And I asked Mr. Luckman during the week to present it to people and even professors and get from them their comments and objections. He has done that. And as I go on now to present the evidence, he is going to present the objections he picked up during the week, and I'm going to try to answer them. Are you ready, Lloyd?
Ready.
Let me go to the first heading then. The first heading is, only men make artistically.
Now, I have an objection here.
So soon?
Right away.
Right away.
In discussing this particular point, the immediate reaction that even I have to this challenge of yours is that we know how beautifully a spider spins his web. We have seen the perfection of the bee's hive. We've seen the beavers engineering excellence in the dam. So how can you say that only man can make things and make them artistically?
Well, my answer to that objection, whether it comes from you or anybody else, is, first of all, that I'm not concerned now with the excellence, which is the way you're using the word artistically, the excellence of the animal's production, because it's quite true that the spider's web is often more perfect, more subtly perfect than any human lace could be. It is not the excellence of the animal's production, but rather the way in which animals make and men make. I say that animals are makers by instinct and men are makers by art. And in that difference, makers by instinct,
and make us by art lies the whole difference between man and animals, because animals shows that animals act instinctively, and the human art represents the influence of human reason. What is the sign that animals make by instinct only, and men by art? It is that in a given species of animal, whether it be a beaver or a bee or a bird, the production is exactly the same generation after generation because the instincts are the same. Whereas in human productions, works of human art, from one tribe to another, from one century to another, you have a great variability, and more than that, an improvement, a perfection of the art. We received a letter last week which perfectly makes this point. It comes from a young man, from Thomas McGurney, who is a high school student in San Mateo. It's an extraordinarily good letter. Young Mr. McGurney, quotes the eminent French naturalist, Henri Fabre, a great student of insect life, and goes on to say, there is never any improvement in the spider's spinning of its web during the spider's lifespan. Furthermore, a spider living today spins his web in the same manner his ancestors did 100 or 1,000 years ago. There is no improvement in the course of generations. Contrast this, young Mr. McGurney points out, contrast this with the way in which the individual man increases his skill during his own lifetime in any art, or the way in which the human race increases all its skills and arts in the course of human history. This shows a gap which, as young Mr. McGurney says, and I agree with him, is an unbridgeable difference between man and animal. But there are two more ways of seeing this. First, it is true, Darwin is right when he says that animals use rudimentary tools. He described monkeys as using rocks as weapons or stones to crack nuts. And I showed you a while back how a chimpanzee made a tool out of these two bamboo sticks and used it. Yes, it's true that animals may use tools of this kind, and therefore one shouldn't say of man that he's the only tool-using animal. But think of this. Man is the only animal who makes by machine tools. What is a machine tool? Think of the production of Grand Rapids furniture. Think of the assembly line on which automobiles are turned out. The man makes a machine and puts into that machine specifications, what are represented on his blueprints, so that the machine then turns out an indefinitely large number of pieces of the same kind, pieces of furniture, automobiles. This shows that man can separate the idea of the thing to be produced from the individual production. He doesn't make the things individually. He puts the making into the machine, and the machine turns out any number. This is the sign of art in human making, and here is seen man's grasp of the universal, the plan, the idea, apart from the individual. One other point about human making. I would say that only man produces works of fine art. All the other things Mr. Luckman referred to, the beavers, dam, the birds, nests, the bees' hive, these are useful things, satisfying biological needs. Only man makes things which satisfy no biological need at all, makes them for pleasure, for his enjoyment. That's why I would say that the Cro-Magnon man who lived about 25,000 years ago, who lived in the caves of southern France and drew charcoal drawings of reindeer on his cave walls, was a man, because he was there making something strictly for the pleasure of imitation and not for any biological utility in the struggle for existence. Human making is different from animal making. Now let me go to my second piece of evidence. It is under the heading, only men think discursively.
Well, now, right on this point, Dr. Adler, you've already given us some very compelling evidence, and as I talked to the professors whom you referred to about this particular point, they were most emphatic that animals do solve problems, and problem solving is another way of expressing intelligence. I mean, you talk about intelligence, you say, what is the ability of this student or this animal to solve a problem? Yeah. So with the emphasis on problem solving being same as intelligence, intelligence meaning thinking, I would say that animals think, and these people too, in their behalf, that animals think discursively.
All right, let me answer that objection, Lloyd. Notice what Mr. Luckman said. Animals solve problems. Certainly they do. In fact, all animal thinking takes place in the course of problem solving. Now, what's the next point? All the problems that animals solve are problems that arise from basic biological needs, problems they must solve in order to survive in the struggle for existence. Men solve problems, they solve them by trial and error, or by perceptual insight, the way curless apes did. Now, men solve problems like that in that way, too. Put a man in a room, lock the doors, close the transom, seal the windows, pour smoke under the door, yell fire, and that man, as soon as panic seizes him, will start to fight his way out of that room by trial and error, claw his way out, just as an animal does. But the point is that men think in another way. In the first place, they think about problems that there is absolutely no need for them to solve so far as their biological needs are concerned in the struggle for existence or survival. The problems of mathematics, the problems of philosophy, the problems of any of the theoretical or speculative sciences. And in the second place, the manner in which they think about those problems is quite different. An animal, when thinking about or solving a problem, is active, bodily, uses his senses, uses his hands, not hands, his limbs, runs around. But a man thinks in a different manner. You all, I'm sure, have the image of the human thinker. It is given us by that statue of Rodin's, which is here in San Francisco, Le Penseur. Notice that statue. I want you to look at something. There is the posture of human thought. And what you see about that posture is intense bodily inactivity. Only men sit down to think about what is important and not urgent. Now, I said at the beginning that only men think discursively. Why did I say discursively? The word discourse connects with the word discussion. I meant only men think in words that are abstract. Now, you may say that I've already told you that Yerkes has discovered a fairly elaborate language in the possession of chimpanzees. Sure, monkeys chatter to one another, and chimpanzees are the highest sort of monkeys, and they chatter to one another. But what is this monkey chatter like? What are the 125 so-called words that Professor Yerkes found in the language of chimpanzees? They are all emotional outcries, expressions of need, of pain, of pleasure, of rage, of hate, of hunger, of sex. Men have such cries, too. We say, oh, ah, ouch. That's like the monkey's cries. But we also have a syntactical language. We, in thinking, make sentences. And in those sentences are words that are abstract, that refer to things that cannot be perceived but only understood. Human language is the only language that is syntactical, has parts of speech and sentences. And believe me, the day the first monkey or chimpanzee utters a single sentence, one single sentence, I'll be quite willing to believe that there is only a difference in degree between men and apes. Now, let me go to my third main heading. Only men associate politically.
Now, Dr. Adler, as I discussed this point, I got an immediate reaction, almost a violent reaction, in terms of the resistance to the implication that animals don't associate. They pointed out not only the herd instinct, but they also indicated, for example, among insects, whether you're thinking of wasps, or you're thinking of termites, or you're thinking of ants, a tremendous hierarchy, a authority structure, and this, again, gives evidence, you see, of their direct parallel with mankind's actions. And so my challenge is how, in the face of that kind of evidence, from the behalf of these who argue against you, that you could say that only men associate socially in this fashion.
Mr. Luckman, and your friends, I didn't say that only men are social. I didn't say that only men are gregarious. Obviously, quite true what Mr. Luckman says, that there are many other animals that are social or gregarious. I said only men associate politically. Man is the only political animal. Let me explain that. All the other animals that are social or gregarious are so instinctively. The organization of the beehive, of the ant colony, of the termite colony, these are all instinctive organizations. They do not change from century to century, from generation to generation. But humans form by reason the conventions, the constitutions, the laws, the rules under which they live. And that's why in human families or human states, political societies, there is such a great variability from tribe to tribe, culture to culture, epoch to epoch, century to century. Man is the only animal who devises the constitutions and laws under which he lives. This is the evidence of his reason and freedom. In fact, instead of saying man is the only political animal, what I perhaps should say even more sharply is man is the only constitutional animal. Now, how should I summarize all this? I think the best way I can summarize this is to have you look at a cartoon I saw last week. It is a cartoon that was published in the Gadfly, a magazine issued by the Great Books Foundation. What does the cartoon say? As I am saying, man is a rational animal, 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 till you're tired of hearing me say it. Only I would say even more emphatically than the cartoon, that only man is a rational animal. Man alone is rational. And I think the evidence I presented under these three headings today justifies the conclusion that only man is rational. Now, are there any more objections, Lloyd?
Yes, I have one or two more objections, and these would come under the heading of concern for the development, for example, of human beings. Take the infant, for instance. There's a period in the infant's life when it isn't rational, and in that period, then, is it also human? And another closely allied question would be based on the unfortunate human being who is either imbecilic or moronic, and therefore is in a state really of vegetation. And people say they're vegetables. How can you call them human beings or human and rational beings?
Well, I think, in answer to Mr. Luckman's question, which is an objection I'm sure that many people would make, I would say that the baby and the idiot or imbecile are clearly humans. And we treat them as such in terms of our laws of murder and general laws concerning the treatment of persons. Both the baby and the idiot have the potentiality of reason, even though reason as a power has not yet matured in the human infant to the point of use. And even though in the idiot or imbecile there is a pathological impediment to the use of reason. But let me show you this. Let's look at a baby and a pig. Look at the baby and the pig, nice clean pig, and as you look at them, you don't see any more reason in the baby than you do in the pig. They act very much the same way, but there's this difference. The baby usually grows up to be a man. The pig never does. Never does. Or take the idiot and the dumbest of animals. The idiot, modern medical research is able to cure. We are able to cure Creek idiocy, for example, and someday may be able to cure Mongolian idiocy. But the stupid animal is not subject to cure. This shows the presence in the baby and the idiot of the potentiality of reason absent from the animal who has no reason at all. Now, I'd like to add to this one very important point. To say that man is a rational animal is not to say that he is always reasonable or that he's always acting rationally. On the contrary, that is too seldom the case. The interesting point is that only man is ever unreasonable. Only man is irrational. Only man goes insane or becomes neurotic.
Hold on. Yes? In this matter of neurosis and man becoming neurotic, we have evidence going back to your experimental psychology with animals that the psychologists have been able to make rats in their mazes frustrated and neurotic. So why only man degenerating in that fashion?
Yeah, the experimental evidence Mr. Luckman mentions is very interesting evidence. It is true that in recent years, psychologists with laboratory animals, usually rats, sometimes cats, have tormented them into neurosis, what the psychologists call neuroses. Actually, by creating, through conditioning in the animal, a kind of tight conflict of impulses. The animal breaks down under the tension of that conflict into a severe frustration that, I admit, might look like a neurosis. But think of this difference. Think of this difference. It takes a psychologist. It takes a psychologist to give a rat something like a neurosis. Rats, cats, other animals, left to themselves, don't get that way. But human beings are quite able to become neurotic without the help of psychiatrists. For the most part, that is the case. And that, I think, is quite remarkable evidence of the difference between the rational animal who can become irrational, unreasonable, insane neurotic, and the poor rat or cat that it takes a psychologist to upset. Now, I'm going to go on next week to sum up the issue. I'm going to weigh as carefully as I can the evidence on both sides. Perhaps I shall add a little more evidence. Perhaps Mr. Luckman will bring in some more objections to complete the picture. But when we have weighed the evidence on both sides, I then want to go on to see if I can show you the deep importance that this issue has or should have for all of us, both theoretically and practically, affecting our lives morally, politically, and spiritually. I hope you will send in questions on the material we covered today, or questions about the issue and its importance to you as we go on to conclude the discussion of man in our session next week. Thank you very much.